Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the high country thin air, endless stars, and a sprawling white hotel that looks like it wandered out of another century and simply decided to stay. This is the Stanley Hotel, sitting up in Estes Park, Colorado, with the Rockies pressing in on every side. It's beautiful in daylight, sure, but once the sun slips behind those peaks, the building seems to straighten its shoulders and breathe in a little deeper. And trust me, you probably wouldn't make it out of this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the Stanley the way most people do, winding up a mountain road, the air getting colder, the pine scent thick in your lungs. For a moment, you're alone out here, the world muffled by distance and altitude. Then, through the trees, you see it. The wide verandas, the red roofline, the white facade glowing against the dark slopes. It doesn't feel like a place you're driving to. It feels like a place that's been waiting. When you step inside, the air changes. There's the scent of old wood, polished brass, and strangely, a faint floral note, as if someone just passed by carrying fresh roses. The lobby stretches in warm amber light, and the carpet has that hush underfoot that swallows sound. The well-known version of this moment, the grand arrival, has been told for over a century. The Stanley is famous for its elegance, its history, and, of course, its ghosts. Guests have sworn that upon crossing the threshold, they've been greeted by a polite nod from someone who wasn't actually there. Others talk about luggage being whisked away before a bellhop arrives, or the sensation of a hand brushing lightly against theirs when they hand over their keys. An obscure version of the arrival story is older, whispered among longtime staff, that sometimes guests arrive twice. They'll walk in, check in, wander upstairs, and then minutes later be seen stepping through the front doors again as if for the first time, confused about how they got back outside. It's as though the hotel itself resets the scene, trying to make the first impression again and again until it's just right. You head toward the check-in desk, the floorboards giving a polite groan under your boots. There's a long mirror on one wall, gilded and grand, and for a second you catch your reflection in it, only you're not alone in the glass. Standing just over your shoulder is a figure tall, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, face slightly turned so you can't see the eyes. You turn around. The lobby is empty, except for you and the clerk. The clerk smiles, the way people do when they've seen this before. You'll be on the 4th floor, they say, sliding over a brass key instead of a card. There's a mystery here that even regulars can't shake. The hotel has modern locks, modern lights, modern everything. And yet, some guests, always first-timers, are given old brass keys. The staff says it's a theme touch, but those guests often report more activity than anyone else. Cold drafts, flickering lights, whispered conversations in empty rooms. You pocket the key and take the elevator up, its gentle clank echoing in the shaft. There's a faint hum in the walls, not electrical, not quite mechanical, more like the low murmur of voices just out of range. And here's a gentle joke to keep the nerves in check. If you do hear someone whispering in an old hotel, and they start giving you directions, make sure they're pointing away from the basement. The doors slide open onto a hallway, lined with ornate sconces. The carpet is thick, swallowing your footsteps. At the far end, a shape moves a woman in a long dress, her hem brushing the floor. She turns a corner before you can call out. You follow, of course. But when you reach that corner, the hallway is empty. Only the faint scent of roses lingers. Some say that smell is Flora Stanley herself, welcoming new guests the way she always did, graciously, and with a bouquet nearby. Others aren't so sure it's her. You set your bag in your room, glance once at the window, view mountains black against a silver sky, and sit on the edge of the bed. The air feels different here, lighter, thinner, as if the walls have learned to breathe with you. You tell yourself you'll sleep well tonight, that the first night in a haunted hotel is just about stories, not experiences. But out in the hall, you hear the creak of a floorboard, then another, and you're not sure whether it's someone walking toward your room or away from it. The next morning, you wake to the kind of mountain quiet that's so deep it feels like it's pressing against the windows. No traffic, no hum of distant city life, just the occasional groan of the old building settling into itself. You're halfway through your first cup of coffee when you remember the footsteps from last night. You tell yourself it was just another guest, maybe someone pacing to shake off the travel. But as you open the door, the hallway looks exactly as it did before you went to bed, empty, still, and faintly perfumed with roses. The Stanley is known for greeting guests in ways that defy the normal welcome. The well-known accounts are easy to find, guests reporting that upon arrival, they felt a hand rest gently on their shoulder, guiding them toward the front desk. Others swear they heard a soft, polite, "welcome" whispered in their ear before seeing anyone in the lobby. It's never loud, never startling, always just enough to make them glance over their shoulder. One of the hotel's tour guides tells a story about a couple who arrived late at night, well past the staff's normal shift. They found the front doors unlocked, walked inside, and were greeted by a man in an old-fashioned bellhop's uniform. He asked for their names, smiled, and told them their key was waiting on the counter. When they turned to thank him a moment later, the lobby was empty. Security footage from that night showed the doors opening, the couple walking in, and no one else. The obscure version of the ghostly welcome is less refined. A handful of guests, mostly those checking in during the off-season, have reported what they describe as a push into the lobby. They step through the doors, feel a sudden gust of warm air, and find themselves propelled a few steps forward. One man even claimed it knocked his hat off, though the hotel staff insists that's just the wind. The catch? This has happened on perfectly still nights, with no draft inside or out. As you step into the hallway, you catch movement in your peripheral vision, someone passing through the far end of the corridor. They're tall, broad-shouldered, moving at a brisk pace. You call out, but your voice sounds muted, swallowed by the old plaster and wood. The figure doesn't turn, doesn't slow, and then simply isn't there anymore. You make your way down to the lobby, half hoping for something, half dreading it. The clerk from yesterday greets you with the same easy smile. "Sleep well?" they ask, as though the building's nightly stirrings are just part of the package. On the check-in counter, you notice something new, an antique brass key. Not yours, not anyone else's you've seen. It sits there without a tag, the number worn smooth. The unresolved mystery here is that no one knows exactly who is doing the welcoming. Some insist it's Flora Stanley herself, continuing her role as the hotel's gracious hostess. Others point to reports of an unidentified male figure tall, in an early 1900s uniform, who doesn't match any known staff records. And there's the stranger theory still, that the welcome isn't tied to a single ghost, but to the hotel itself. As if the building, with its long memory and deeper shadows, knows when you've arrived and wants you to know it too. You step outside for some fresh air before breakfast, letting the cold bite at your face. The view is all mountain ridges and frozen streams, breathtaking in its scale. But when you turn back toward the building, you could swear there's someone standing in one of the upstairs windows, watching you. It's not your room, a gentle joke to break that icy little moment. If you do wave at a ghost in a hotel window, just be prepared they might wave back. Inside, the fire in the lobby crackles quietly, and for a moment it almost feels like any other mountain hotel, but the air still carries that faint rose scent. And you can't shake the feeling that you've already been noticed here, noticed in a way that won't fade just because you step outside. Some welcomes are polite handshakes. The Stanley's welcome feels more like an unblinking stare, the kind that stays with you long after you've walked away. Room 217 sits at the heart of the Stanley Hotel's most famous ghost story, and even before you step inside, you can feel it tugging at you. The hallway leading there is brighter than most, lined with antique light fixtures that seem to hum faintly in the stillness. Your footsteps echo just a little too sharply, bouncing off the high plaster ceilings. When you reach the door, the brass numbers gleam like they've been polished that morning. The key turns smoothly, and as you push the door open, the scent inside is different. Less roses, more old linen, and wood warmed by decades of mountain sunlight. The well-known version of Room 217's legend begins in 1911. A storm had rolled in over the Rockies, knocking out the power to much of the hotel. Back then, the Stanley ran on its own electrical system, with backup gas lamps in every room. In 217, a leak from one of those gas lines filled the room without anyone noticing. Elizabeth Wilson, the head chambermaid, entered with a lit lamp, and the resulting explosion tore through the entire wing. She was thrown down into the dining room below, breaking both ankles but miraculously surviving. Since then, guests in room 217 have reported a variety of strange events. Suitcases unpacked while they're out, shoes lined neatly by the bed, lights turning on and off on their own. Male guests often tell of feeling a faint pressure on the bed beside them, as though someone has sat down, while female guests have woken to find the covers tucked in tightly around them. The obscure version, one not as often told, comes from staff who work late shifts. They say 217 is one of the hardest rooms to keep locked when it's unoccupied. Even when checked and double-locked, the door will sometimes be found ajar, just enough for a sliver of light to fall into the hall. Once, a housekeeper swore she heard someone humming inside. When she entered, the room was empty, but a neatly folded towel sat in the exact center of the bed. You stand in the center of 217, taking it all in. The wallpaper is cheerful in daylight, but you can see how, in the moonlight, it might take on a different character. The closet door is slightly open, and there's that old instinct, part curiosity, part wariness, that makes you want to close it, but not without looking inside first. The closet is empty, completely empty, yet, just as you're about to step back, a faint, sweet smell drifts out like the powdery scent of old-fashioned soap. It's gone in seconds. The unresolved mystery here is whether Elizabeth Wilson is truly the spirit in 217. Some guests swear they've seen her, describing a woman in a long skirt and apron, moving purposefully about the room. Others believe the energy comes from something else entirely, an imprint left by the explosion itself, a moment of violence that the walls can't forget. You sit on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking softly. The view from the window is stunning, mountains sharp against the pale winter sky, but the glass feels colder than it should, your breath fogging it instantly. A gentle joke to loosen the knot in your chest. If your bedsheets suddenly get tucked in tighter than when you fell asleep, just roll with it. You might have the best turn-down service in Colorado. As you stand to leave, you glance once more at the mirror above the dresser. For a split second, there's a shape there, a woman standing just over your shoulder, hands folded neatly in front of her, watching with calm, unreadable eyes. You turn, but there's no one, only the faint sound of a door closing softly down the hall. You step out, locking the door behind you. The brass key feels heavier in your hand than it did before. The 4th floor of the Stanley Hotel has a reputation all its own, and it's not for the mountain views. As you climb the narrow staircase, the air seems to grow lighter but colder, as if you've stepped into a different part of the building's memory. Long before this was a luxury hotel, the upper floors were used to house the nannies, governesses, and children of wealthy guests. Back in the early 1900s, it was common for entire families to stay here for months at a time, bringing along their staff. While the parents mingled in the ballroom below, the children played in these halls, the sounds of their laughter drifting down through the stairwells. The well-known version of the Phantom Children story is one you'll hear on every ghost tour. Guests lying in bed at night hear running footsteps in the hall, followed by the giggle of a young boy or girl. Sometimes it's a game of tag, the sound weaving back and forth across the hallway. Other times it's a soft knock on the door, light enough to make you wonder if you imagined it, followed by quick retreating footsteps. One guest swore she heard children laughing outside her door around 2 a.m. When she opened it, she caught sight of 2 small figures turning the corner, hand in hand. She followed them down the hall, but when she rounded the corner herself, the hallway was empty and completely silent. The obscure version comes from a housekeeper who worked the night shift for years. She says there's one particular room on the 4th floor, she won't say which, that the children seem to favor. She's entered to find the bed covers rumpled, as though someone had been bouncing on them, small handprints on the mirror, and once, a marble sitting perfectly in the middle of the carpet. The marble was warm to the touch, as if it had just been held. You walk slowly down the hallway, the old floorboards creaking under each step. Every so often, you hear what sounds like a faint squeak, a laugh muffled by distance. Then, clear as day, a child's voice says something just behind you. You turn, but the hallway stretches away, empty. You tell yourself it's just the sound of the building, the way old wood breathes and shifts. But the truth is, the laughter doesn't sound like the groan of timber. It sounds like someone genuinely having fun. The unresolved mystery here is who these children are. Some believe they're the offspring of guests who loved the Stanleys so much they never really left. Others whisper that the laughter comes from children who were ill and sent to the mountains for the cure, only to pass away here. And then there are those who think these aren't children at all, but something older, taking on a form that makes you let your guard down. You stop outside a particular door. The hallway is quiet now, still. Then you hear it 3 quick knocks, exactly at knee height. A gentle joke to ease that tension. If ghost kids start playing ding-dong ditch with your hotel door, at least they're keeping the spirit of childhood alive, even if they're not technically alive themselves. As you walk away, you hear the sound of running feet pass right by you. Though there's no one there, the air stirs, and for a moment, you catch the faint scent of peppermint candy. By the time you reach the staircase, the hallway behind you is silent again, waiting for the next guest who dares to wander alone. The Stanley's grand staircase is the kind of feature you expect in a turn-of-the-century luxury hotel, wide, sweeping, and polished to a soft gleam. It curves gracefully from the lobby to the upper floors, its carved banisters worn smooth by more than 100 years of hands. But the staircase has another claim to fame, one that isn't printed in any glossy brochure. Something watches from it. The well-known accounts almost always begin the same way. Guests or staff are crossing the lobby when they look up and see a figure standing halfway down the stairs. Often, it's described as a man in a dark suit, sometimes with a bowler hat. He stands still, one hand resting on the rail, head slightly tilted as if studying the people below. If you blink or glance away for even a moment, he's gone. Tour guides say this figure has shown up in photographs as well. Always faint, always slightly out of focus, but undeniably there. One of the most famous images shows a couple posing in the lobby, while, behind them, a translucent man leans casually on the banister. The photographer swore no one was on the stairs at the time. The obscure version, shared only among longtime employees, is that the watcher isn't always human-shaped. Sometimes it's described as a shadow that leans out over the rail, its form too tall and thin to be a person. Other times, it's just a sensation walking up the stairs and feeling someone directly behind you, matching your pace, but with no sound of footsteps. One bellman admitted he once felt a cold breath on the back of his neck as he carried luggage up, only to turn and find the staircase empty from top to bottom. You stand at the foot of the staircase, gazing up. The sunlight from the tall lobby windows bathes the lower steps in gold, but the upper half fades into shadow. You take the first step, feeling the way the carpet softens the sound of your tread. Halfway up, you pause. The lobby behind you looks different. It's not darker, exactly, but there's a stillness that wasn't there a moment ago. You glance toward the curve of the stairs, and that's when you see it. A figure at the landing above you, one hand on the banister. The suit is dark, the posture relaxed, but you can't make out a face. You blink, and the space is empty. The unresolved mystery is identity. Some say it's F.O., Stanley himself, keeping an eye on the comings and goings of his guests. Others think it's a residual image of a long-forgotten bellhop, frozen in the act of greeting someone who never quite arrived. And then there are those who claim the watcher changes, appearing differently depending on who sees him, suggesting it's not a single ghost at all, but the building showing you whatever will hold your attention the longest. You keep climbing, the railing smooth under your hand. By the time you reach the top, the air feels noticeably cooler. You turn to look down at the lobby and catch yourself thinking that, from this angle, you'd have the perfect view of anyone who came or went. A gentle joke to ease the chill. If a ghost ever stares at you from a staircase, just remember they're probably judging your shoe choice. You step off onto the upper floor, but can't shake the feeling that you've simply taken the watcher's place. Somewhere below, maybe someone is looking up right now and seeing you standing there. The ballroom at the Stanley Hotel is pure elegance, a wide, airy space with high ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, and enormous windows that let the sunlight spill across the room during the day. At night, the glow of chandeliers turns it into a place where you half expect to see couples gliding across the floor in long gowns and tailcoats. At one end of the room sits a polished grand piano, the kind of instrument that seems to hold a personality all its own. That's because, according to legend, it does. The well-known version of this story ties the piano to Flora Stanley, wife of F.O. Stanley. Flora loved music, and the piano was her constant companion when the couple lived at the hotel. Guests would hear her playing in the evenings, the notes drifting through the halls like a warm invitation. Today, long after Flora's passing, people still hear the piano, except the keys move when no one's there. Staff tell of locking up the ballroom at night, only to hear faint music start as they walk away. Guests have stepped inside to see the lid quivering, a single note ringing in the otherwise empty room. One tour group swears they heard a bright waltz as they approached the ballroom, but when they entered, the piano was silent. Moments later, the lid slammed shut with enough force to echo off the walls. The obscure version is stranger still. Some have claimed the music they hear isn't the bright, crisp style Flora was known for. It's slower, almost mournful, as though someone is practicing but can't quite remember the tune. A few insist they've heard humming along with it, but not Flora's high, delicate voice. This voice is deeper, male, and doesn't match any known resident or staff from the Stanley's early days. One maintenance worker, called in to fix a light late at night, said he passed the ballroom and saw a shadow seated at the piano bench. The figure's hands moved over the keys, but there was no sound. When he stepped inside, the bench was empty. You stand at the ballroom doors now, the hinges sighing softly as you push them open. The air smells faintly of polished wood, and something sweeter roses again, perhaps, or the lingering perfume of long-vanished dancers. The piano waits at the far end, its surface shining in the low light. You walk closer, your footsteps muffled by the expanse of the room. Just as you reach the instrument, a single note rings out. It's sharp and clear, like a question hanging in the air. The unresolved mystery here is who's really playing. Most believe it's Flora, carrying on her evening recitals for eternity. Others think the piano is simply a vessel, a focal point for the building's energy, an object so tied to memory that it draws in whatever spirits happen to pass through. And, of course, there's the whisper of a theory that the piano doesn't need anyone at all, that it plays for itself, remembering tunes from a time when the world outside was different. You rest your hand lightly on the keys. They're cool to the touch, almost too cool, as though the piano has been sitting in an unheated room. You press one, and the note rings out into the silence. A gentle joke to cut the unease. If you hear a ghostly piano playing, don't request chopsticks. You might offend a century of musical pride. As you step away, you can't help glancing back. The piano sits exactly where you left it, still and silent. But in the reflection of the polished lid, you could swear you see someone sitting at the bench, hands poised to play. You decide not to check twice. Stephen King's visit to the Stanley Hotel is one of those stories that's been told so many times, it's become part of the building's DNA. Even if you've never read The Shining or seen the film, you've probably heard whispers about the night he spent here, the night that transformed the Stanley from a charming mountain hotel into one of the most famous haunted destinations in the world. The well-known version is simple. In the fall of 1974, King and his wife Tabitha arrived at the Stanley at the very end of the season. The place was nearly empty. They were given room 217, the same room tied to the explosion that injured Elizabeth Wilson decades earlier. That night, King wandered the halls, imagining them filled with ghosts. He claimed he had a vivid dream of his young son running through the hotel's corridors, screaming, chased by a fire hose that had come to life. By morning, the seed for The Shining had taken root. The Stanley became the inspiration for the Overlook Hotel, an isolated, grand, and deeply unsettling place where the walls themselves seemed to breathe with memory. The obscure version of King's stay, shared mostly among die-hard fans and longtime staff, adds details that sound almost too strange to be coincidence. One housekeeper swears she saw King standing alone in the lobby well past midnight, staring toward the staircase as if listening to something. Another says that in the morning, before checkout, King asked whether the ballroom always smells like roses. Some believe he experienced far more that night than he's ever admitted unexplained cold spots, flickers of movement in his peripheral vision, and the distinct sense that someone else was in the room with him as he slept. You find yourself retracing his imagined footsteps now, walking the same long hallways he must have wandered nearly 50 years ago. The carpet muffles your steps, but the silence is heavy, as if the building is waiting for you to notice something. You pause outside 217, feeling that same low hum in the air you felt before. The doorknob gleams under the dim light, and for a moment, you wonder if you dare spend a night here with only a notebook, waiting for the walls to start whispering ideas into your ear. The unresolved mystery is whether King's inspiration came purely from imagination, or if the Stanley gave him more than just an idea. Some say that The Shining's most unsettling elements, the elevator doors, the ballroom, the feeling of being watched, are not fiction at all, but lightly disguised truths from that night. Others think the hotel simply amplified the darkness already in the story he was meant to write. As you walk past the empty ballroom, you feel it, a sudden rush of cold air brushing against your side, as though someone just hurried past. You glance around, but the room is still. A gentle joke to take the edge off. If a hotel gives you book ideas, maybe check if it charges royalties for ghostly inspiration. You leave the hallway and step into the lobby, imagining the way it must have looked to King Grand, but strangely hollow, with the echo of your own footsteps as your only company. It's easy to see how one quiet night here could spiral into visions of endless winter, endless hallways, and the sense that you might never leave. And maybe, in some ways, you never really do. The hallways of the Stanley Hotel are long, narrow rivers of patterned carpet, lined with rows of doors that seem to watch you as much as you watch them. The lighting is soft, but never quite warm, the kind of glow that leaves corners a little too shadowed. They're beautiful in their way, but they're also where some of the hotel's strangest and most personal encounters happen. The well-known version of the haunted hallways legend is that they're conduit places where the hotel's many energies overlap. Guests walking alone report the sensation of someone falling into step behind them, only for the sound to vanish the moment they turn around. Others hear muffled conversations drifting from empty rooms, or feel a brief, icy brush against their arm. Some visitors have described passing a stranger in period clothing, a maid in an old-fashioned uniform, or a man in a bowler hat, only to look back and find the hallway empty. Cameras have caught faint, pale shapes crossing doorways or peeking from behind corners. The obscure version involves something staff rarely share with tourists: the mirror effect. On certain nights, especially when the hotel is quiet, people have reported seeing movement in hallway mirrors that doesn't match what's happening around them. A shadow that lingers after you've walked past. A figure rounding the corner in the reflection, but not in real life. One night shift employee said she was vacuuming the hallway outside room 401 when she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror on the wall. She smiled reflexively, except the reflection didn't smile back. She unplugged the vacuum and refused to work that hallway alone again. You walk slowly now, your footsteps a soft thud on the carpet. The air feels heavier here, almost like it's pressing you toward the middle of the hall. The wallpaper pattern seems to shimmer slightly in your peripheral vision, though when you look directly, it's still. Halfway down, you pause. The silence isn't complete, you can hear a faint tapping, like someone's fingernails drumming lightly against wood. It's coming from just ahead. But as you take a few steps closer, it stops. The unresolved mystery of the hallways is whether they're haunted by actual spirits or simply act as amplifiers for the mind. The Stanley's design, with its endless lines and repeating patterns, plays tricks on the senses. Still, there are too many stories, too many consistent descriptions, to write them all off as imagination. Some say the hallways themselves are alive, recording and replaying moments from the hotel's long history. You glance over your shoulder and see nothing, but the light down the hall seems dimmer now, as though it's stretching farther away from you. The distance between you and the elevator feels longer than it did a moment ago. A gentle joke to loosen your shoulders. If a hallway ever feels like it's getting longer, just tell yourself you're getting your steps in Ghost Tour or not. Finally, you reach the end of the hall. The elevator doors stand still and silent, their brass panels gleaming faintly in the low light. You press the call button and wait, trying not to glance back down the stretch of carpet you just walked, because if you do, you might see someone standing there. Room 401 is one of the most requested and most avoided rooms at the Stanley Hotel. It's tucked away on the 4th floor, a part of the building that already hums with strange energy. But this room has a personality all its own. The well-known version of the story centers on a ghostly cowboy. Guests who've stayed here describe waking in the middle of the night to find a man standing at the foot of the bed. He's tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in old Western attire, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. Sometimes he just watches silently. Other times, he tips his hat before fading away. Some guests have even claimed he climbs into bed beside them. A woman once reported feeling the mattress dip, as though someone lay down next to her. When she turned, she saw a grinning cowboy face inches from hers before he vanished. The obscure version comes from a maintenance worker who swears he once entered 401 to fix a radiator and found the closet door wide open. Inside, hanging on a single hook, was a long brown duster coat and a cowboy hat, neither of which belonged to the current guest. He stepped out for tools, and when he returned, the closet was empty. Another strange detail. Some visitors say they hear faint spurs jingling in the hallway outside before the cowboy appears, as if he's pacing back and forth, deciding whether to come in. You step inside 401 now, the door clicking softly shut behind you. The air feels cooler than the hallway, and there's a faint scent of leather, dry, dusty, like an old saddle. The bed is neatly made, but the blanket seems slightly rumpled at the corner, as though someone had just sat there. You check the closet, empty. But as you turn away, you hear a faint metallic jingle from somewhere near the bed. The unresolved mystery is who the cowboy was in life. Some speculate he was a rancher who stayed here in the early 1900s and died in the mountains nearby. Others think he's not tied to the Stanley at all, that he's just passing through, drawn here by the hotel's energy. And then there's a more unsettling theory, that he's not a ghost of a person at all, but something wearing the image of a cowboy because it knows it unsettles people just enough to keep them talking. You sit on the edge of the bed, trying to listen past the soft hum of the radiator. For a few moments, there's only silence. Then, as clear as day, you hear 2 slow footsteps and the faint creak of leather. A gentle joke to shake it off. If a cowboy ghost tips his hat to you, at least you know your presence is appreciated. You stand, moving toward the door. Just before you leave, you glance back at the bed and swear the blanket is pulled back a few inches farther than when you arrived. You decide you've seen enough of room 401 for one night. Room 428 doesn't look particularly remarkable at first glance. Like many of the Stanley's guest rooms, it has warm wooden furniture, a comfortable bed, and a view of the mountains. But guests who stay here soon realize that the view isn't the only thing watching them. The well-known version of the haunting, in 428, involves a man who appears in the corner of the room, usually near the ceiling. He's described as tall, with dark hair and an old-fashioned outfit, sometimes wearing a jacket with brass buttons. He doesn't speak, he doesn't move much. He just stands there, staring. Guests have reported waking in the middle of the night to find him looming over the bed, his face inches from theirs. He vanishes the instant they move or switch on the light, but the lingering sense of being watched never leaves. Others tell of knocking sounds in the ceiling, as though someone were walking in the attic above, except 428 doesn't have an attic. The obscure version is one most guests never hear. The man doesn't always appear as a full figure. Sometimes it's just his head, slowly emerging from the shadows in the corner. One visitor swore that she saw his mouth moving silently, like he was trying to speak but couldn't. When she leaned closer, her ears filled with a deafening static, and the figure disappeared. A housekeeper once entered the room to find the furniture, moved chairs angled toward the bed, as if an invisible audience had been set up. She left immediately, refusing to service the room alone after that. You step into 428 now, closing the door gently behind you. The light from the hallway fades, leaving the room dim. The corners seem darker here, as though the shadows cling a little tighter than they should. You place your bag on the bed and glance toward the far corner. Empty. But as you turn to check the closet, there's a faint creak wood groaning under weight from somewhere above you. The unresolved mystery of the man in 428 is whether he's tied to the hotel's history at all. Some believe he's a miner or prospector who stayed here briefly before dying in the mountains, his spirit finding its way back. Others think he's connected to a much older history of the land, something predating the Stanley entirely. A few even suggest he's not a ghost at all, but a kind of sentinel that watches anyone who sleeps in his space. You lie back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The wood above you seems perfectly still, but you can't shake the feeling that if you blink, something will be looking down at you. A gentle joke to keep the tension light. If a ghost ever watches you sleep, just hope it's not judging your choice of pajamas. Finally, you stand, deciding to leave the room's mysteries for another time. As you pull the door closed, you hear a soft, deliberate knock from inside. The 4th floor of the Stanley Hotel is, by many accounts, the liveliest part of the building, and not just because it's often full of curious guests on ghost tours. This floor is famous for its most playful residents, the ghostly children. The well-known version of the story says that in the early 1900s, the fourth floor was used as a large attic space, sometimes housing female employees, children of staff, and occasional long-term guests with families. Over the decades, the laughter and footsteps of those children never seemed to fade. Visitors today often hear the sound of running in the hallways, tiny feet tapping quickly along the carpet, followed by the faint giggle of a child. Sometimes a ball will roll unexpectedly into view from around a corner, though no one is there to throw it. Other times, guests report the sensation of small hands tugging gently at their clothes. The obscure version is a bit stranger, and staff don't always share it openly. Some say the children here aren't always playful. A few guests have awoken in the middle of the night to find a child-sized silhouette standing in the doorway, watching. One man claimed the shadow slowly walked to the side of his bed, leaned close, and whispered something he couldn't quite hear before vanishing completely. A housekeeper once recalled cleaning an empty room when she heard the sound of crayons on paper behind her. When she turned, there was a sheet of hotel stationery lying on the desk with the faint, uneven outline of a stick figure drawn in green. You're standing in the hallway now, and you can feel the change in the air. The space is warmer than the rest of the hotel, almost cozy, but it's broken by little bursts of sound, a shuffle, a muffled laugh, the faint patter of footsteps just ahead. You follow the sound toward one of the old storage closets, but when you arrive, the door is slightly open and the room is empty. No movement, no sign of anyone inside. The unresolved mystery is who these children actually are. Are they the spirits of guests and staff's families who once stayed here? Or are they something else entirely, echoes of youthful energy that the building has somehow preserved and replays over and over? Some skeptics suggest the sounds are just the hotel settling, but even they have trouble explaining the moments when objects move or appear without explanation. A gentle joke to keep the chills playful. If ghost kids start a game of tag, remember, you're automatically it. As you turn to leave the hallway, you hear it clearly this time. A child's laugh, light and quick, coming from just behind you. When you spin around, the corridor is empty, but a small red rubber ball sits at your feet. The Stanley's grand staircase is more than just an architectural showpiece. It's a vantage point, a stage, and for some, a place where the living and the dead briefly cross paths. Guests and staff alike have reported strange encounters here, most of them revolving around the feeling of being watched from somewhere along the steps. The well-known version is a favorite among ghost tour guides. Visitors will often be walking through the lobby when they look up to see a figure on the staircase. Sometimes it's a man in early 20th century formal wear, standing halfway down, hand resting on the polished banister. Other times, it's a woman in a flowing dress, frozen in mid-step, as though she's been caught descending to a grand party that's been over for decades. There are also the photographs, dozens over the years, showing unexpected shapes on the stairs. In one famous image, a translucent figure appears to lean over the rail, watching a group of tourists below. The photographer swore no one was there when the picture was taken. The obscure version is more unsettling. In certain quiet hours, staff say the staircase seems to shift subtly, as though the angles change when no one's looking. One maintenance worker claims he once took a set of measurements for a repair, only to find them different a week later. A night clerk reported hearing slow, deliberate footsteps moving up the stairs, but when he looked, the steps were empty, except for the faint, shadow-like impression of a foot on the carpet, fading before his eyes. You stand at the base of the staircase now, gazing up. The glow from the lobby lights spills over the lower steps, but the upper half is shrouded in softer, almost golden shadow. You start climbing, your hand gliding over the smooth, cool wood of the banister. Halfway up, you pause. The air here is still but charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. You glance over your shoulder and catch the faintest shimmer like heat haze at the landing below. The unresolved mystery is identity. Some insist the man in the bowler hat is none other than F.O. Stanley himself, keeping an eye on his legacy. Others think the figures are echoes from a glamorous night long ago, eternally replaying. A few even suggest they're not tied to the hotel at all, but drawn here by the space itself, an elegant crossroads between worlds. You reach the top, looking down over the lobby. From here, the view is commanding. It's easy to imagine a host surveying arriving guests, or, if you're of a more superstitious mind, a lingering presence deciding who to greet and who to avoid. A gentle joke to take the edge off. If you ever catch a ghost staring at you from the stairs, just assume they're admiring your outfit. As you step onto the upper landing, the hum of voices from the lobby resumes, as though the building has decided to act normal again. You move on, but not without the strange feeling that someone is still watching from halfway down. Room 217 is the crown jewel of the Stanley Hotel's ghost lore, a place where history and haunting are woven so tightly together, you can't pull them apart. And at the heart of it all is Elizabeth Wilson, the head chambermaid whose story still lingers like the faint scent of roses in the air. The well-known version begins in 1911. Wilson was lighting acetylene lanterns in room 217 during a storm when a gas leak caused a massive explosion. The blast destroyed part of the floor and threw her across the room, breaking her ankles. Remarkably, she survived and returned to work within weeks. Decades later, guests began reporting strange happenings in 217. Clothes mysteriously unpacked from suitcases and neatly put away, shoes arranged in tidy pairs, and lights turning on and off without explanation. Many believe Wilson still tends to the room, keeping it orderly for her guests. Some couples even say she's particular about who shares the bed. Unmarried couples have reported feeling a sudden, cold presence between them in the night, like an invisible chaperone, making sure propriety is observed. The obscure version comes from a former hotel employee who claims Wilson doesn't just tidy, she communicates. He tells of a night when he was setting up the room for a VIP guest and found the bed neatly made with a single folded note on the pillow. In looping handwriting, it read, "Welcome back." There was no record of anyone entering the room before him, and the handwriting didn't match any staff. Others have said they've heard her voice, faint but polite, calling their name when they're alone. You step into room 217 now, the door swinging gently shut behind you. The carpet muffles your steps, and the air feels curated somehow. Not just clean, but arranged, like every item is exactly where it should be. The bed is perfect, not a wrinkle in sight. You set your bag down and glance toward the bathroom, catching the faintest whiff of floral perfume. It's delicate, old-fashioned, the kind you don't smell much anymore. The unresolved mystery of 217 is whether Wilson is a spirit bound here by the accident or simply by devotion. Some say she's happiest when the room is occupied by polite, tidy guests and will leave them in peace. Others believe she's always watching, always ensuring the space is cared for long past her lifetime. You move toward the window to admire the view of the Rockies. As you pass the bed, you notice something odd. The edge of the blanket is smoothed down now, perfectly even. You could swear it was slightly rumpled when you walked in. A gentle joke to keep the mood light. If you're going to share a room with a ghostly housekeeper, at least you know your bed will be made better than you could manage yourself. The room feels calm, almost welcoming, but you can't help glancing at the closet door one last time before leaving. It's closed now, though you don't remember closing it. The Stanley's concert hall is a jewel box of a room-ornate trim, polished wood, and a stage that's seen everything from grand performances to intimate gatherings. But long after the last audience member leaves and the final note fades, the hall often refuses to fall silent. The well-known version of the tale features a ghostly pianist. Guests and staff report hearing the delicate notes of a piano drifting from the stage when the hall is completely empty. The melody is sometimes a formal waltz, other times something light and playful, like someone simply passing time at the keys. When curious listeners peek in, the piano is still and no one is there. Some say the spirit is a former performer who loved the hall so much they never left. Others believe it's directly tied to Flora Stanley herself, F.O. Stanley's wife, who was an accomplished pianist and known to play for guests. The obscure version is more peculiar. A former night security guard once claimed he heard not just piano music, but the sound of chairs being moved and polite applause following each piece. When he entered the room, it was empty except for one lone chair, angled toward the piano as if an invisible audience member had stayed behind. On another occasion, a guest staying in a room near the hall swore she woke to the sound of a full rehearsal. Piano, strings, even faint singing. She checked the time, it was 3:12 a.m., and the music stopped the moment she opened her door. You step into the concert hall now. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of varnish and old wood. The grand piano sits center stage, its black surface gleaming softly in the low light. You approach slowly, your footsteps echoing in the emptiness. As you near the keys, you notice one depressed ever so slightly, just enough to make you wonder if it's a trick of the eye. Then, a single note rings out, high, delicate, and absolutely real. The unresolved mystery is who, exactly, is playing. Is it Flora, returning to her favorite pastime? Or perhaps a nameless spirit, keeping the hall alive with music so the silence never quite settles in? A gentle joke to ease the tension. If a ghost offers to play you a song, at least you won't have to tip them afterward. You back away slowly, and just as you reach the doors, the piano releases 3 soft, playful notes in quick succession, almost like a farewell. Beneath the Stanley Hotel lies a space most guests never see, a network of tunnels and crawl spaces once used by staff to move about unseen, transport supplies, and even access the main buildings during harsh winter weather. Over time, these underground corridors have developed a reputation for being as haunted as any guest room above. The well-known version of the story focuses on sudden temperature drops and unexplained whispers. Tour guides leading small groups through the tunnel often pause mid-sentence when a distinct voice echoes from somewhere behind them, despite everyone being accounted for. Many report hearing their names whispered in the dark, sometimes followed by the sensation of a fingertip brushing the back of their neck. One of the most famous experiences came from a group who swore they saw a shadow dart across the narrow passage ahead. When they reached the spot, there was no turn, no alcove, just solid stone wall. The obscure version is a little more unsettling. A maintenance worker once got lost after taking an unfamiliar side route during renovations. He claimed the tunnel seemed to stretch farther than it should have, and that the air took on a musty, metallic scent. He finally emerged into a section he didn't recognize, only to find an old, rusted lantern hanging from a hook. When he came back with a colleague later, the lantern was gone, and the passage where he found it didn't exist anymore on the hotel's floor plans. Some locals whisper about tunnel keepers, ghostly figures said to linger down there, ensuring the space remains undisturbed. They're described as tall, gaunt shapes with pale faces, glimpsed only in the corners of flashlights before vanishing. You duck into the tunnel now, feeling the temperature drop almost immediately. The air is cool and still, with the faint scent of earth and aged wood. The stone walls close in on either side, and your footsteps echo just a little too loudly. Halfway down, your flashlight flickers. You tap it, and it steadies just in time to catch a fleeting shadow in your periphery. You turn quickly, but the tunnel behind you is empty. The unresolved mystery is whether the hauntings here are tied to specific people, former staff, delivery men, or even guests who wandered too far, or if the tunnel itself has absorbed decades of nervous energy, replaying it in strange ways. A gentle joke to break the tension. If you ever get lost in a haunted tunnel, at least you'll have a great story for your next dinner party, assuming you make it out. You move toward the far end, where the tunnel opens into a small storage room. For a moment, you swear you hear footsteps approaching from behind, but when you turn, there's only silence and the long, empty stretch of stone. Before F.O. Stanley ever dreamed of building his grand hotel, the land beneath it belonged to Lord Dunraven, a controversial figure whose reputation was shadowed by rumors of greed, manipulation, and scandal. Though he never lived in the Stanley, many believe his spirit still roams its halls, resentful of the place that rose on land he once claimed. The well-known version paints Dunraven's ghost as a quiet but unsettling presence. Guests report smelling strong pipe tobacco in empty rooms or catching the faintest glimpse of a tall, well-dressed man with a heavy mustache and sharp features. He's often spotted lingering in doorways or watching from the shadows of the lobby before disappearing without a sound. Some say he's particularly fond of the 4th floor, where he's been seen leaning casually against a wall, only to vanish when approached. The obscure version is more peculiar. A longtime staff member swears that late one night, while locking up, he passed a window and saw a man standing in the courtyard below, staring up. The man was dressed in early 20th century attire and held a silver-headed cane. The employee went outside to investigate, but the courtyard was empty, and there were no fresh footprints in the snow. Another story involves a guest who claimed to have been followed from the lobby to her room by a man she thought was another guest. She described hearing steady footsteps behind her all the way down the hallway, but when she turned to hold the door for him, there was no one there. You find yourself near the grand lobby now, the warmth of the fireplace spilling across the polished wood floors. A faint smell of tobacco lingers in the air, rich and unmistakable, though no one nearby is smoking. You scan the room and spot a tall figure in the corner, dressed in a dark suit, his mustache catching the light. For a split second, you think about walking over, but the moment you take a step, the figure dissolves like smoke. The unresolved mystery is whether Dunraven's lingering presence is one of ownership or annoyance. Some believe he haunts the Stanley because it stands on land he lost. Others say he's drawn to the grandeur of the building, secretly proud to be part of its history, even if only as a shadow. A gentle joke to ease the air. If you bump into a ghostly aristocrat, remember, good manners are timeless. The lobby grows quiet again, and the faint smell of tobacco fades, as though the ghost has wandered off to another part of his domain. You're left with the impression that Dunraven's story here is far from over. Room 401 has a reputation that even the most skeptical guests can't quite shake. While many rooms at the Stanley are linked to one or two consistent ghostly figures, this one feels like it's always occupied by something. Not necessarily unfriendly, but undeniably watchful. The well-known version says that 401 was once used as housing for male employees during the hotel's early years. Guests staying here often report feeling as if they're being observed, especially from the corner near the closet. One man described the sensation as standing in a room with someone silently judging you, though he couldn't see a soul. There are reports of the closet door opening on its own, sometimes in the dead of night. One couple claimed that after shutting it firmly, they awoke to find it wide open again, only for it to slam shut with such force it rattled the floor lamp. The obscure version is more unnerving. A woman who stayed in 401 on a stormy night swore she awoke to find a shadowy figure crouched beside her bed, its head tilted slightly as though studying her face. When she turned on the light, there was nothing but the impression of weight remained on the carpet where the figure had been. A former security guard tells a different story. During his rounds, he heard a deep male voice say, "Not now," from inside 401. When he opened the door, the room was dark and empty. You're inside the room now, the air noticeably cooler than the hallway. The bed is neatly made, the antique furniture polished, but your eyes keep drifting toward the closet. It's slightly ajar, the darkness inside thick enough that you can't see where the back wall begins. You move to close it, but pause. The air near the doorway feels heavier, denser. You shut it anyway, the latch clicking softly into place. The unresolved mystery of room 401 is identity. Some believe it's haunted by the spirit of a former employee, still patrolling his assigned quarters. Others think it's a more territorial presence, something that resents intrusions into its space, no matter who comes through the door. A gentle joke for the moment. If the closet door opens by itself tonight, maybe it's just trying to help you pick an outfit. You sit on the edge of the bed, listening. Somewhere, faintly, there's the creak of a floorboard, but it's not beneath you. It's inside the closet. The fourth floor of the Stanley Hotel is where stories multiply. It's not tied to one single haunting, but to a chorus of them, different voices, different presences, all sharing the same long, creaking hallways. If the other floors feel haunted in certain rooms, the fourth feels haunted everywhere. The well-known version begins with laughter. Guests often report the sound of children running up and down the hall late at night, small feet pattering, giggles echoing, sometimes accompanied by the squeak of a toy. When guests step into the hall to investigate, they find it empty. Some say these are the spirits of children who once stayed at the hotel during long summer vacations. Their joy somehow etched into the walls and replaying like a record that never wears out. Others tell of a woman's voice calling softly down the corridor, as though searching for someone. Her tone is gentle, but the sound is so clear it can make the hair on your arms rise. The obscure version is stranger. A former employee swore he encountered a man in uniform on the fourth floor tall, wearing a dated bellhop outfit. The man gave him a polite nod, stepped into a guest room, and closed the door. When the employee knocked moments later to check if anyone was inside, there was no answer, and the room was locked from the outside, unoccupied for weeks. Some guests have also described hearing heavy furniture being moved around in the rooms above them, except the fourth floor is the top floor, with nothing but attic space above. You step onto the fourth floor now, the carpet soft underfoot, the lighting a little dimmer than the floors below. The hallway stretches on ahead of you, lined with closed doors, each with a small brass number plate. A faint laugh carries from somewhere ahead, high-pitched and fleeting. You follow it, passing one door, then another, until you reach the end of the hall, where the sound abruptly stops. The unresolved mystery here is whether the fourth floor's activity comes from multiple spirits bound to their own memories, or if there's a single entity taking on different forms to keep visitors guessing. A gentle joke to lighten the mood. If you hear kids running down the hall at 2 a.m., maybe they're just trying to find the ice machine. You turn to head back, but this time, you notice something odd. The air behind you feels warmer, like someone just brushed past. And for just a moment, you think you hear the faint squeak of a rubber ball rolling across the carpet. The Stanley Hotel's lobby is a place of elegance and comfort. Plush chairs, a roaring fireplace, the smell of polished wood and coffee drifting from the cafe. But among all that warmth, there's one odd little story that has puzzled staff for decades: the ghostly lobby phone calls. The well-known version is simple but eerie. At various points in the hotel's history, the old switchboard operators reported receiving calls from unoccupied rooms. A light on the board would flash, they'd patch through, and they'd hear silence. In some cases, it wasn't silence at all, but faint breathing on the other end, as if someone was trying to decide whether to speak. Operators would send someone to check the room, only to find it locked and empty, sometimes even with furniture draped in dust covers during the off-season. The obscure version takes it further. One former front desk clerk claimed that in the early hours of the morning, a call came in from a room that no longer existed. Its number had been retired decades earlier during a renovation. The caller's voice was low, formal, and very clear. "Could you send someone up?" The clerk, thinking it was a prank, traced the line, but the call hadn't gone through any of the hotel's live circuits. Another employee swore that one night, the lobby phone itself rang a line that shouldn't even receive calls. When he answered, a woman's voice whispered, "Don't go upstairs." Then, the call cut out. You're standing near the reception desk now. The lobby is quiet, the fire casting a warm glow across the carpet. The old-fashioned phone on the counter is still, the cord curling neatly beside it. Just as you turn to walk away, it rings one crisp, sharp note that seems to echo in the silence. You glance at the clerk, who looks just as startled as you. The caller ID shows no room number at all, only a string of zeros. The unresolved mystery is whether these calls are tied to specific ghosts, former guests trying to reach the living, or whether the hotel itself is somehow replaying fragments of old communications, the voices of long-ago guests bleeding through the years. A gentle joke for the tension. If a ghost calls the front desk, at least you can be sure it's not about a late checkout fee. You take one last look at the phone before leaving. For a moment, you're certain you hear a faint click, like someone gently setting a receiver back in place on the other end of a line that should no longer exist. The grand staircase at the Stanley Hotel is a centerpiece broad, graceful, and drenched in natural light from the tall windows that overlook the mountains. Guests stop here for photos, soaking in the elegance. But when the crowd thins and the halls grow quiet, the staircase becomes something else entirely, a place where many swear they're not alone. The well-known version of the story features ghostly figures appearing in photographs. Guests often pose on the stairs, only to discover later that someone else is in the frame, a man in a bowler hat, a woman in turn-of-the-century dress, or a shadowy figure with indistinct features. These strangers never match any staff or tour members present at the time. In some cases, the figures appear semi-transparent, their outlines blurred as if caught mid-step between this world and the next. The obscure version is stranger still. A professional photographer hired for a wedding at the Stanley claimed he saw a woman in a long, dark gown ascending the stairs. She didn't look at him, didn't speak, just glided upward before vanishing halfway to the landing. When he reviewed his camera roll, she appeared in none of the images he'd taken during that moment. There's also the tale of a guest who, while walking up late at night, felt a sudden weight on the banister, as if someone else's hand had gripped it alongside his. The sensation stayed with him for several steps, even though he could see there was no one there. You stand at the bottom of the staircase now, the red carpet rich under your feet, the wooden railing gleaming from years of polishing. As you begin to climb, the air feels slightly cooler, heavier. Halfway up, you catch movement in the corner of your eye, a flicker of black fabric disappearing around the curve of the stair. You hurry to the landing, but the hall above is empty. The unresolved mystery is whether these apparitions are tied to specific former guests, perhaps those who considered the Stanley their grand stage, or if the staircase itself acts as a sort of liminal passageway, catching brief echoes of people who have walked it over the past century. A gentle joke to soften the moment. If you bump into a ghost on the stairs, at least you won't have to squeeze past them on the landing, they'll just vanish. You glance back down toward the lobby. For the briefest moment, you think you see someone standing there, looking up at you. But when you blink, the space is empty, save for the steady glow of the chandelier. The Stanley's ballroom is a wide, gleaming expanse of polished hardwood, crystal chandeliers, and tall windows that let the mountain lights spill in by day. At night, it becomes something quieter until, according to countless reports, it doesn't. Because the ballroom, it seems, still throws parties long after the guests have gone home. The well-known version of the tale begins with music. Staff closing up for the evening have reported hearing a faint waltz drifting through the closed ballroom doors. The sound grows clearer as they approach, sometimes accompanied by the rhythmic shuffle of dancing feet across the floor. But when the doors are opened, the room is empty and silent. Guests have also claimed to hear laughter and clinking glasses from the ballroom in the early hours of the morning, as if a lively celebration is taking place out of sight. The obscure version adds even more detail. A night manager once swore that, while doing rounds, he peeked into the ballroom and saw it lit up as if for an event tables set with fine china, candles glowing, couples in vintage evening wear twirling to music from a grand piano. He blinked, and it was gone. The lights, the people, the music, leaving only the faint scent of cigar smoke in the still air. Another guest, wandering the halls after a bout of insomnia, claimed to see a woman in a gold gown step out of the ballroom and vanish into thin air, just as he called out to her. "You're here now," standing at the edge of the ballroom. The doors are closed, but faintly, so faintly you might think you're imagining it. You hear the soft swell of strings. You press your ear to the wood and catch a fragment of melody before it fades into silence. Curiosity wins. You push the door open. The vast space is empty, the chandeliers dark, yet the faintest echo of a piano key hangs in the air, as if someone had just lifted their hands from the instrument. The unresolved mystery is whether these ghostly parties are echoes of real events, weddings, galas, or banquets from the hotel's heyday, or if the spirits themselves are gathering to relive their happiest moments. A gentle joke to lighten the moment. If you ever get invited to a ghost party, at least you won't have to worry about the food going bad. It's already beyond expiration. As you turn to leave, your shoes squeak faintly on the floor. But then, so does another pair, keeping pace just behind you. You glance back into the darkness, but the room is still and silent once more. The Stanley's grand piano, tucked neatly into a corner of the ballroom, has been the source of some of its most enduring ghost stories. Even when the room is locked, people claim they've heard it being played softly, almost hesitantly, like a musician warming up before a performance that never begins. The well-known version of the story credits the music to Flora Stanley herself, the wife of F.O. Stanley. Flora was a skilled pianist and was known to entertain guests with her playing during the hotel's early years. Many believe her spirit lingers, still filling the halls with music. Guests on late-night tours sometimes report faint piano notes drifting toward them, even though the lid is closed and the keys untouched. There are also stories of the piano playing a single note, sharp and insistent, when someone gets too close as if warning them away. The obscure version takes a stranger turn. One security guard recounted hearing a lively ragtime tune coming from the ballroom at 2 a.m. When he stepped inside, the room was empty, but the piano bench had been pulled out. He pushed it back in, locked the doors, and left. 10 minutes later, the music began again. Another guest claimed that when she leaned in to examine the piano during a quiet afternoon, she felt a sudden cold draft and heard the faint sound of a woman humming directly beside her ear. You approach the piano now, its glossy black surface reflecting the faint light from the hall. The air feels heavier here, as if you've stepped into a private space. You hover your hand over the keys, resisting the temptation to press one down. That's when a single note rings out, soft but clear. You pull your hand back instantly. The keys are still. The unresolved mystery is whether Flora is truly the one playing, or if some other spirit simply enjoys the instrument. Some speculate that the music is a residual haunting, the sound forever trapped in the walls and strings of the piano. A gentle joke to cut the tension. If the ghost pianist takes requests, maybe avoid asking for anything too upbeat. You wouldn't want to get the spirits too excited. As you turn to leave, the piano gives one more delicate note, as if saying goodbye. Or, perhaps, see you later. The Stanley Hotel's hallways seem to stretch on forever long. carpeted tunnels lined with antique sconces and polished doors. In daylight, they feel almost regal, but at night, they take on a hushed, expectant quality, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. It's in this quiet that guests have reported some of the most unnerving encounters of all. The shadow figures. The well-known version describes them as human-shaped silhouettes that move independently of any light source. Guests see them dart across hallways, peeking around corners, or standing perfectly still in the distance until they simply fade away. Some report feeling a wave of cold pass through them as these shapes slip by. One particularly famous sighting came from a tour group. As the guide was speaking, several people gasped, claiming they saw a tall, dark figure glide from one wall straight through the opposite wall without breaking stride. The obscure version gets even stranger. A former night porter told of delivering towels to an upper floor when he noticed a shadow pacing the far end of the corridor. Thinking it was a guest, he called out, but the figure stopped mid-step and seemed to turn toward him, even without facial features. Then, it stretched unnaturally tall, almost touching the ceiling, before dissolving like smoke. Another guest reported lying in bed with her door slightly ajar when she saw a shadow move across the crack of light from the hallway. Moments later, she remembered she was on the top floor and no one else was staying in the rooms nearby. You're standing in one of these long halls now. The carpet muffles your footsteps, and the lights above flicker faintly, as if in sync with your breathing. Halfway down, you pause. At the very end, a darker patch of shadow seems to lean ever so slightly into view, like someone watching. You blink, and it's gone. The unresolved mystery is whether these shadows are spirits without enough strength to fully manifest, or something else entirely. Entities that choose to remain shapeless so they can move unnoticed. A gentle joke to keep things from getting too heavy. If a shadow figure follows you, at least you don't have to worry about it stealing your seat. It can't actually sit down. You take another step, the hall stretching endlessly ahead. This time, you don't look back. Continue this script. Go to 24. The Stanley Hotel's elevator is as much a relic of its era as the grand staircase or the ballroom. A brass-paneled cage that hums softly when it moves, its gate clinking shut with a sound that feels pulled from another century. Most guests see it as a charming antique. Others won't ride it at all. The well-known version of the elevator story is one of strange, unrequested rides. Guests have pressed the button for their floor, only to find the elevator stopping at levels no one selected. Sometimes the doors open to an empty hallway, lit dimly, as if waiting for someone who isn't there. Other times, the elevator pauses between floors, the lights flicker, and an overwhelming chill sweeps through the small space. Several people have claimed that, while riding alone, they felt the elevator shift ever so slightly, as though another person stepped in beside them, but the mirrors reflected no one. The obscure version comes from late-night staff. One desk clerk swears the elevator will occasionally arrive in the lobby, already open, its cage drawn back, as if it's inviting someone inside. Once, after locking up for the night, he saw it descend from the upper floors, with no one aboard, yet the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air, thick enough to make his eyes water. Another unsettling account came from a housekeeper. While riding to the 4th floor, she felt the elevator stop short and the lights go out. In the pitch black, she heard the quiet, deliberate sound of someone clearing their throat right behind her. The lights returned in a blink, and she was alone. You step into the elevator now, the metal gate rattling as you slide it shut. The buttons glow faintly under your fingertips. You press for the 2nd floor, and the car begins its slow, steady rise. Halfway up, it stops. Not with the smooth arrival of a planned stop, but a sudden halt. The light overhead flickers once, twice. You wait, listening. The air feels heavier, tighter. Somewhere just over your shoulder, you think you hear the faint creak of leather shoes shifting on the floor. The unresolved mystery is whether the elevator is being operated by an unseen hand, maybe a spectral bellhop still tending to guests, or if it's something older, using the elevator as a confined stage to make its presence felt. A gentle joke to ease your grip on the gate. If a ghost rides the elevator with you, at least you don't have to make small talk between floors. The car shudders and starts again, carrying you the rest of the way in silence. When the doors open, the hallway is empty, but the faint smell of roses drifts past you into the shaft. By now you've walked the halls, ridden the elevator, stood beneath chandeliers and mountain light, and pressed your palms to banisters worn smooth by 100 years of arrivals and goodbyes. You've learned the names Flora, Elizabeth, Dunraven, and met the unnameable ones too. The watcher on the stairs, the cowboy, the children in the walls of the fourth floor laughter. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed a pattern in how the Stanley behaves. This place does not chase you, it waits. Morning at the hotel is always gentler than the night. The lobby fire is polite instead of hungry, the windows invite the day instead of reflecting it back at you. A staffer wheels a cart of coffee across the rug with a soft burr, and guests admire the mountains through the glass, trading stories and voices that are just a touch too casual. Did you hear that piano last night? Door opened on its own. Must be the old wiring. You can tell who slept and who didn't. The sleepers joke. The others smile with their mouths and not their eyes. You take your final walk, the farewell circuit, past the ballroom doors that aren't quite all the way closed, past the mirror in the lobby that seems to show the room a split second before reality catches up, past the long corridor where, for a heartbeat, a patch of shade leans like a person listening closely. You're telling yourself it's nostalgia, one last look at an elegant hotel with a colorful reputation. But your steps are slower than they need to be, as if your body knows it's packing something you can't fit in a suitcase. The well-known truth about the Stanley is that people come for a night and leave with a story. Not always a dramatic one, often just a sound, a scent, a shiver that won't explain itself. They post the pictures, tag the location, tell friends they felt something. The hotel thrives on that steady tide of almosts. It doesn't have to prove anything. It only has to let you notice. The obscure truth is the part folks don't always say out loud. Leaving the Stanley doesn't always feel like leaving. A week later, you're washing dishes and catch the smell of roses and think of Flora's hands hovering above the keys. You wake at 2:17 a.m. for no reason at all. Your apartment's hallway, one you've walked 1,000 times, suddenly seems a little longer than it should, as if the carpet is trying on a new pattern when you aren't looking. Your phone rings once and stops, and you half expect the caller ID to read a number that hasn't been used since the gas lamps were taken down. You stand on the front veranda now, bag over your shoulder, mountain air cool and crisp in your lungs. The driveway curves away like a ribbon laid over the slope, and beyond it, ridgelines, sky, the world you came from. Behind you, the hotel breathes. You can feel it in the small of your back, the way old buildings hum with electricity and memory, a choir you only hear when you're very still. There's an unresolved mystery people argue about over coffee and on long drives home. Are the Stanley's ghosts tied to this place like birds to a bell tower? Or do they hitch rides, tucking themselves into the folds of your routine until you catch them peeking? Some say spirits are bound by stone and timber, by the shape of rooms and the angles of stairways. Others insist it's the living who bind them. Attention is a tether, belief a key, and every retelling tightens the knot. Maybe both can be true. Maybe a place like this teaches you how to listen, and once you've learned, you can hear the rest of the world properly, including what you'd rather not. You set your bag down and take one last photograph, the veranda post framed against a sky so sharp it almost rings, the red roof cutting a strong line across it, windows square and bright like careful teeth. When you lower the phone, you catch a flutter in the glass of an upstairs room. Not a figure, not a face, just a fractional shift, like a curtain deciding to breathe. You're not sure if you saw it or imagined it. Either way, the image will sit on your camera roll with a weight that other pictures don't have. Inside, the elevator gives a considerate ding. Somewhere below your feet, a tunnel exhales cool air. A housekeeping cart glides by with folded towels stacked like quiet clouds. Life goes on in haunted places. That's what makes them haunted. People sleep and wake and pour coffee over a floor that remembers every footstep that ever crossed it. A gentle joke before you go. If your suitcase feels a pound heavier on the way out, don't blame the souvenirs. Some memories insist on traveling carry-on. You take the steps instead of the elevator, counting them on your way down, because counting makes the leaving tidy. At the last landing, you pause and put your hand on the banister, the way you've seen 100 strangers do in old photographs. The wood is cool, not cold cool, like something that doesn't waste warmth on those who won't be staying. In the lobby, someone laughs at a story you didn't hear the beginning of. The phone on the desk clicks softly as it settles on its cradle. The mirror catches you, And for an absurd second, you expect not to see yourself, the way the night shift housekeeper once did. But there you are, more tired than when you arrived, more awake too. The reflection lags by a blink. Or maybe you do. Either way, you nod to yourself as if to say, "We did it. We came and we listened." Outside, the air is brighter than you remember. The mountains are blunt and honest. You load the bag into your car and stand with your hand on the door longer than necessary. You think about the fourth floor and the steady patter of small feet. You think about the piano's single polite note and how it sounded like a question mark. You think about the cowboy spurs, the watcher on the stairs, the phone that doesn't ring and then does. You think about Stephen King walking the same length of hallway and catching a draft that smelled like roses in winter. Here's the part they don't put on postcards. The Stanley doesn't want to frighten you away. It wants to be remembered correctly. The stories matter to it. They are its spine and its skin. The way it keeps standing when the weather turns, when the season ends, when the last tour empties into a parking lot of tired rental cars. So take your story with you, whatever size it is. Carry it until it warms to your shape. Tell it carefully, the way you were told. You slide into the driver's seat. The engine's first cough feels indecently loud. The radio jumps to life, too cheerful by half, and you turn it down until all you can hear is the gentle hush of tires on gravel. At the end of the drive, you check your mirrors. The hotel sits where you left it, patient as a lighthouse. For a heartbeat, a single, sideways heartbeat, you imagine someone on the grand staircase, hand on the rail, watching the doorway, the way a host watches a guest walk into the night. If they wave, you don't see it, but you raise your hand anyway. And as the Stanley dwindles in the rear view, the mountain road unspooling ahead, you realize the strangest thing of all isn't what you witnessed. It's the quiet agreement you feel inside you now, that when a building waits for you, the polite thing is to visit again. Because some places you check out of, others you simply leave and a part of you stays behind to keep the lights company.